Hello and welcome to GameSack. We all grew up with 2D games. Okay, we all didn't, but I did because I'm old. Eventually, home consoles got 3D graphics, and that was a hot new trend at the time. If you wanted your game to get noticed by potential customers, it had to be in 3D. Anyway, let's take a look at some excellent 2D series that tried to make the jump into 3D, but didn't do it so gracefully. And to be fair to these series, I'm only going to take a look at the first 3D game in each because some of them ended up having some really good 3D games later in life. So let's get to it. Earthworm Jim got off to a great start. His first game on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo was very strange, but it was way better for him. The Genesis version was a little better though, just saying. The sequel may not have been quite as good, at least in my opinion, but it was still a very solid game. Enter Earthworm Jim 3D on the Nintendo 64. Picking this title almost feels too easy because, well, it's not good and everybody knows it. It has a lot of the staples that made the original games enjoyable, such as the silly animation as you run around and a bunch of voice samples, though those do tend to get old pretty fast. I feel great! The gameplay does its best to be interesting, but sadly it just doesn't quite achieve that goal. You need to run around many different areas, accomplishing lots of different tasks to clear a level. And that's a big part of the problem. Earthworm Jim just doesn't work in an exploratory 3D manner. Gone is the silly fast-paced gameplay of the original games. While there was some small amount of exploration in the 2D games, it certainly wasn't anything like this with big open and largely empty areas. The graphics are also nowhere near as pleasant or endearing as the original games. I mean, let's be real here. Anyone who thinks that this looks better than this seriously needs to get their eyeballs checked. That's not to say that all 3D games look worse than all 2D games, far from it. But this one certainly does. The original 2D games had a type of cartoon style that made them so lovable and honestly like nothing we'd ever seen before at the time. You just can't replicate that very well on first generation 3D consoles. As a result, this game can't rely on its wacky visuals to draw people in. Instead, it has to rely on its gameplay, and that just doesn't measure up. What's sad is that this game basically killed off the franchise, and we talked about it a bit more in depth back in 2017 in our second Franchise Killers episode. I think the big takeaway here is that it kind of sucked to be a great 2D game back when everyone was lusting over that brand new 3D style. I am so glad that both 2D and 3D can coexist these days.
Ungroovy! Yo! Ah! Yo!
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games of the 90s from Konami were awesome. The two games released to the arcade absolutely ruled. All of the games on the NES were fantastic, yes, even the first one in my opinion. Even the Game Boy ones were pretty good, for the most part. And of course, who could forget the releases on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis? Even Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters wasn't awful, at least not on the Super Nintendo. It felt like Turtles games were amazing more often than not, and honestly that's because they were. And what kind of goodness would the next generation of consoles bring? Well, as it turns out, absolutely nothing. No Turtles games were released at all for the 32-bit era consoles. But in 2003, during the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and OG Xbox era, we finally got a new Turtles game called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah, just Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Don't you just hate it when they start back at square one with the names? The version you're looking at here is for the exciting GameCube system from Nintendo. Anyway, this is the first Turtles game in 3D, and once again, Konami did the honors. I'll be honest here, it's not totally horrible, and it does have a lot of potential, but sadly it just doesn't work out very well at all. First of all, this is based on a newer generation of the Turtles franchise, not the cheesy original cartoons. They do try to keep the humor in there, but some of the side characters are slightly different. No big deal, as the only thing that matters here is how the game plays. Up to 2 players can play at a time, and you each have a choice of turtle. Each stage has multiple areas, and each area is usually depressingly long. The action isn't bad, it just kind of gets boring quickly. You keep beating up on these same street thugs again and again who literally appear out of thin air. Fortunately, they don't take very long to die. You run around the stage wherever the arrow tells you to go. Sadly, many of the stages look rather dull, and you'll be seeing a lot of similar graphics over the course of a given stage. If you're lucky, you might face a mid-boss, but they're not a whole lot tougher than the regular enemies. The stage boss puts up a better challenge, but keep in mind it'll be well over 35 minutes until you even see the stage 1 boss. And while it's tougher, it's still pretty easy. Sadly, my recording of fighting a boss got corrupted. Thanks Elgato 4K 60S Plus. Anyway, you can only save between stages. I do like the cel-shaded visuals, and for the time, the characters look pretty good. The music is okay, but nowhere near as fun as the 16-bit games.
Coming at you! Charge!
This title just feels so uninspired and it drags on and on.
That's why I asked you here for a sleepover tonight.
I don't think that anyone felt that this was a worthy successor to the 8 and 16-bit games at all. I mean, anyone besides Konami. Hell, maybe even they didn't. However, it must have sold well enough as this game received 2 sequels in the same console generation.
Yeah, awesome! Some dude, corner pocket! Some dude, corner pocket! Rawhide! Yeah, awesome!
This next series is one that I didn't even know made the attempt to jump to 3D for the longest time. I suppose if I were a bigger fan of Toyota trucks, I would have noticed sooner. Super Off-Road was awesome, especially on the Super NES. In fact, this is by far my favorite version of the game, even if a bit of the screen is cropped off compared to the Genesis version due to the console's lower resolution. It doesn't impact the gameplay at all. You just race your truck around the screen, grabbing nitros, money, and whatnot on your way to victory. Then you power up your truck and race again. It's actually quite addictive. Then they made Super Off-Road the Baja, also on the Super NES. It certainly isn't as good, but I do kinda like it in a weird way. But let's jump to 1997 where we got Off-Road Challenge on the Nintendo 64 from Midway. Now it's in full 3D and performs like an arcade racer. In fact, it feels like Midway took their cruisin' engine, dumbed it down a few notches, and then slapped some off-road action onto it. Yes it is. This game is quite ugly indeed. Like the other off-road games, there are some items like nitros and cash on the track that you want to try to grab. There are a few problems with this though. First, it's very difficult to discern the good items from the random debris that's scattered on the track or even the items that can hurt you. That's right, there are items that can hurt you. Secondly, even if you do notice it, you're going so fast that there's quite literally no time to try to get over to grab it. Lastly, even if you know that an item is coming and you try to get over in time, the control is so bad that you're probably just going to miss it anyway. The game is also extremely unbalanced, especially on the beginner tracks. You need to come in 4th place or better, but good luck. The AI will remain ahead of you race after race. The advanced tracks actually feel like the same difficulty as the beginner tracks. Hell, I was able to win easier on some of the more advanced tracks than the beginner ones.
You're hot!
The only way to really win is to hopefully grab some money during a race and then power up your truck during the shop scenes. Then repeat the races again and again even if you lose, grabbing money to make your truck more powerful than everyone else. Honestly, I couldn't stick with the game long enough to see if this would actually work, but I don't see why it wouldn't. The sound is pretty much garbage all around, nothing special here at all. The Super Nintendo game absolutely destroys it when it comes to audio. Literally just mops the floor with it. Okay, not literally, but figuratively. It figuratively just mops the floor with it. And although it's not a 3D game in a true sense, I'd much rather play Super Off-Road the Baja on the Super Nintendo. At least it's somewhat interesting, you know? It's certainly more fun and responsive. Hell, I'd say the graphics are better as well. And the frame rate is probably comparable. This game is just an ugly mess, even for its time. Mega Man X was an awesome... Wait, no. Mega Man X is an awesome game on the Super Nintendo that gave the Mega Man franchise a new mainline series. The Mega Man X games have been hit and miss, and even ardent Mega Man fans will admit that. I was really surprised that the Mega Man X games on the 32-bit platform stayed in 2D. That's right, they were 2D, and to my knowledge, absolutely nobody complained about that. Nor should they. Thank you, Capcom, for not giving in to that 3D urge. Well, in 2003, Capcom punished the world with Mega Man X7 on the PlayStation 2. Yep, they finally gave in to 3D. The thing is, though, is that when you first start playing the game, it feels like it might be okay. It's a side-scrolling 2D game. Hey, this could be good. But it quickly switches views, so lucky you gets to play it in 3D, and I think you'll find that your life is in no way enhanced by this change. Eventually, you can switch back and forth between characters with the L2 button from a small pool of other characters. And I just said characters twice in the same sentence. I don't like that, but that's how it is. We're moving on. The first two characters you start with, Zero and Axel, both kinda suck. Well, that is if you like Mega Man gameplay. Axel locks onto targets, but his shots are incredibly underpowered, and there's lots of enemies he'll barely be able to damage. His hover jump sucks because you have to press and hold, and instinctively you want to jump, let go, and then press again and hold to hover. Not here. Zero is better as he has a sword that makes short work of most enemies, but not a lot of range. Fortunately, he has a normal double jump. Have fun switching back and forth between characters and remembering on the fly which method of jump they use. Oh well, losing lives and having to start again builds character. Overall, this game is extremely slow. Even in the 2.5D segments, it feels like the game is barely chugging along and you have to wait for the animations to finish themselves. It also feels a bit laggy, even when playing on a CRT. The 3D parts seem out of place and usually with an awful design. The control is still bad here, and I find myself switching between the D-pad for the 2.5D segments and the analog stick for the 3D segments. Your view is forced, and it's rarely in the view that you'd prefer. The stages are so slow that it feels like maybe you're on drugs. Not a lot of drugs, just enough to affect you. Even the menu system is awful. It feels the need to explain everything in the slowest possible manner because Capcom thinks you're a complete idiot and can't figure out something like selecting your team. Not only that, but the menu defaults to the no option for everything, which only adds to the annoyance. To its credit, the graphics aren't half bad. The colors are nice and most of the enemies look decent. Unfortunately, there's no progressive scan option, but everything moves at 60 frames per second most of the time. The sound is nothing special at all, and that is very disappointing from a Mega Man game. The music is completely unmemorable, and sometimes you'll want to yell at the game to shut the hell up!
Can you hear me, Zero? Can you hear me, Zero? Can you hear me, Zero?
I really don't know what they were thinking when they made this one. At this point, some of you may be asking, "Hey Joe, what about Castlevania 64? That's like the poster child of a bad 3D game from a 2D series. You suck, Joe. I hate you. More like ballsack, right? Ah!" Well, I'm not going to cover that in this episode because I still want to do a final Castlevania episode of all the games I haven't covered in that series, and something tells me I don't want to play that one twice. However, I do have another Konami franchise for you here in this episode. Contra is a very popular 2D run-and-gun from Konami. It really shined in the 8-bit era. It got even better in the 16-bit era, in my opinion, with two vastly different yet incredible games. Since Konami hates you, they decided to farm out the series to Appaloosa for the 32-bit consoles. Konami also apparently asked them to take a giant dump on everything that made the series enjoyable. And that resulting pile is Contra Legacy of War on the PlayStation and Saturn. This game is absolutely awful with only one redeeming quality that you've probably already noticed. That's right, it runs at a rock-solid 60 frames per second. That's quite literally the only good thing I can say about this game. Not only are you moving around in a 3D space, you need to jump to hit higher targets and lay down to reach lower targets. You might be asking, so what? The 2D games did that, how could it be bad here? Well, now you have a pseudo overhead perspective and crap is coming at you from everywhere all at once. It just doesn't work. I really couldn't get anywhere in the PlayStation version, so I tried it on the Saturn. Since the controller is leagues better, I found it a bit easier to deal with here, but it still sucks. The games look roughly the same on both platforms, though there is a slight difference in texture quality here and there. Also, the Saturn version is slightly letterboxed to handle the extreme disappointment a little better. The sound quality on the PlayStation version is a bit nicer, but even then, it's pretty sad. Anyway, back to the gameplay. You start out with 9 lives, and every time you touch something, anything, you lose one. Again, just like the 2D games, but it just does not translate to this style of gameplay. What's more is that there's no death animation, just a quiet yell and the life counter goes down 1 notch. It feels like there's no collision in the game at all, as you can just run through stuff losing lives without even knowing it unless you're really listening closely. It also can be quite difficult to line up your shots with the target. You can strafe, but it's not very well implemented. Another thing that's not implemented is analog control, since this game came out much too early for that. So you can imagine how fun this one is to control. There's a 3D mode, and you actually might need it to help line up your shots for some targets. This game is an insult, and Konami should be ashamed of its existence. To tell you the truth though, I don't think they are. Bubsy from Accolade was a mediocre game at best on the 16-bit platforms. Honestly, I've never really been able to experience much enjoyment with this game or its sequel. If you like it, that's fine, it's just that, well, I mean, why would you like this? Some people do, though. Bubsy is 3D in Forbidden Planet on the PlayStation is even worse. Way worse. And that's really all I have to say about that. I reviewed this game back in episode 56, which was in 2012, and it's still way too soon to play this again. If you really want to know what I think, go back and watch episode 56, but I am shutting this one off now. Well, maybe in a few seconds.
You're worse than my granny!
I've never been the world's biggest fan of Mortal Kombat, but I could certainly see why others were really into it. Usually it's because of the ultra violence and blood, which were so crazy and cool when we were all 12. These days it's just like, yeah, whatever. The digitized graphics were always fun to look at because to me it represented some fine stop motion animation work done with real people. The first 3 Mortal Kombat games would all be received very well by its fans.
Wins.
In 1997, however, the series went 3D with Mortal Kombat 4 from Midway. This was released first in the arcades, then on the PC, PlayStation, and Nintendo 64. Granted, the gameplay is still mostly in 2D, but instead of high-resolution digitized characters, we get polygonal characters. And yikes do they look extremely simple in comparison to the earlier games. In fact, if it weren't for the gratuitous and quite frankly ridiculous amount of blood spraying all over the place when even the weakest hits land, you might think that this game is for kids by how cartoonish and bland the visuals are. The PlayStation version here looks a bit grittier than the Nintendo 64 version, but it's still very simple looking. I mean, look at Johnny Cage's shadow. Can you say LOL? I have to admit though that it doesn't play horribly, especially on the Nintendo 64. Granted, it still feels a bit stiff and limited, just like my no. And although the graphics are completely laughable, at least they move at 60 frames per second. That's almost reason to have a damn parade through the streets, as this almost never happens on the Nintendo 64. Still, this game didn't do anything to make me a fan of the series. Of course, we'd see much better entries later in the series, like Mortal Kombat 10 and 11 here, which are entirely composed of polygons. Not only that, but they look amazing and actually control quite well. These are very fun games that I highly recommend buying. But Mortal Kombat 4, this certainly isn't one you're going to invite your friends over to impress them with. Instead, this is something to play when you're drunk just to laugh at. What else would you and your friends do on a Saturday night? Paperboy was a cool game where you had a paper route in which you attempted to deliver newspapers. But the neighborhood is absolutely crazy with tons of insane stuff going on and everyone is out to get you just because you exist. It's pretty fun, though I don't think I've ever survived my route for a single week. There was even a second game that added more craziness and houses on both sides of the street. Both games are generally pretty good for some quick fun. In 1999, we got Paperboy on the Nintendo 64 from Midway. Wow, Midway is behind several of the games in today's episode. Says a lot about them, I suppose. Anyway, Midway felt that the world needed more Paperboy, and of course it needs to be in 3D, and that's pretty much what this game is. Also, again, they're starting back over at square one by calling it Paperboy. And dear God, is it ugly! You ride around delivering papers to different houses. However, this time you don't need to worry about losing subscribers or anything like that. The only thing that matters is that you deliver a paper to the houses that are in color. Deliver to enough of the houses and you go to the next neighborhood. Sometimes you'll go back to a neighborhood you've already played to deliver to some different houses. In the beginning, you can choose either Paperboy or Paper Girl. Paper Girl is definitely the game's easy mode as she can move in any direction at any time, whereas Paperboy is stuck on a set path like the original game. If you play as Paper Girl, an arrow will point to the nearest house that wants a paper. Of course, shenanigans are going on in each neighborhood, but somehow they're just not quite as funny as the original. Maybe because it's hard to discern what things actually are sometimes. Actually, it's hard to discern what anything is. I mean, just look at this game. I challenge you to find a worse looking 3D game from that generation. It would be tough, really tough. And that generation wasn't known for its luscious 3D graphics to begin with, so this is one of the ugliest of the ugly. I mean, damn. I want to give Midway the benefit of the doubt as I assume this is a stylistic choice instead of having awful 3D artists. But seriously, why would you choose to have your game look like this? Some of the music isn't bad, but most of the voices are so muffled that they make bad Genesis games sound like Dolby Atmos.
Behold!
Even the gameplay just isn't that great. There's a boss fight here, and I'll be honest, it was kind of fun, but it does seem out of place. This game is just bad. No wonder nobody reads newspapers anymore. Yes, that was supposed to be funny. Please laugh for several minutes. Thank you. There you go, several series that did not get a great start in 3D. How about you? Do you know of any more that did not get a good start in 3D? I was kind of, thinking about including Ghouls and Ghosts, Maximo, but I haven't really played much of Maximo. I know. What do you think of Maximo? Or reversely, how about some series that, got vastly improved by going to 3D? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSag. Oh, one moment. Have you ever wondered why you can't take performance-enhancing supplements to improve your gaming skills? I mean, real athletes can take steroids and other supplements to give them the edge that they need, but not gamers? That just isn't fair. That's why I've come up with a Sack Enhancer gaming steroid. Just take 1 pill per hour with 36 ounces of water and watch your gaming abilities soar into the stratosphere. But just keep it to yourself if you participate in any gaming tournaments. It'll be our little secret. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some high scores to break. Side effects may and probably will include muscle spasms, headaches, soreness of the left nostril, frequent urination, infertility, infidelity, kidney disease, blindness in your grandchildren, loss of 42 IQ points, the inability to drive cars that are blue, being kidnapped by aliens, loss of the use of the middle toe on your right foot, anal discharge, constant migraines in your best friend's third cousin twice removed, excess saliva production, and bloody stool.